I'd like you to imagine that our boss walks up to us and says, hey, we've got an opportunity. Right now we're using a leased line to go from site 1 to site 2, but what we'd like to do is we'd like to leverage the internet to build basic connectivity using a VPN between site 1 and site 2. Is there any possibility that we could do that with our existing infrastructure? And the answer is absolutely yes. And in this nugget, we'll take a look at the concepts of the pieces involved to implement an IPsec tunnel from a Palo Alto firewall to another VPN peer. Let's begin. Our goal in this nugget, in this overview, is to talk about how we would implement an IPsec site-to-site tunnel between two VPN peers, one of them being a Palo Alto firewall. Now, if you are brand new to IPsec, you've never heard of it before, you don't know how it works, as a prerequisite to implementing IPsec on the Palo Alto, I would have you go to the Security Plus course, which is SY0401, and watch video number 34, which goes over the basics and the fundamentals regarding several security protocols, including IPsec. And if you want to jump to the 11-minute mark in that nugget of Security Plus, that's when it begins to talk about the fundamentals and the details regarding how IPsec works with the IKE Phase 1 tunnel and the IKE Phase 2 tunnel and the basic concepts. So for those of you who don't know about IPsec yet, you haven't been exposed to it yet, I would encourage you to pause right now, go check out video number 34 from the Security Plus course. And then once you've watched that nugget, then come back here, we'll take a look at the concepts of how those are implemented on the Palo Alto. And then in a subsequent nugget, we'll actually do the implementation. So in our topology, let's imagine that we have another site. So let's say this Palo Alto is at site number 1, and off of the internet we have another site at site number 2. And maybe at site number 2 it's another Palo Alto firewall, or maybe it's another vendor like a Juniper device or a Cisco router that's connecting site 2. So maybe this private network at site 2 is 10.5.5.0/24, and we'd like to have access for the people at that site to securely communicate with maybe the 10.11 subnet, and vice versa. So the basic concepts of an IPsec site-to-site tunnel, which you already know either from previous experience or you watched that Security Plus nugget, would be we would establish what's called an IKE, let me use a different color, that's hard to see. We would establish an IKE Phase 1 Security Association. So SA is an acronym for Security Association. And that IKE Phase 1 tunnel allows these two devices. We'll call this guy Router 2 and we'll call this guy PAFW1. So the IKE Phase 1 tunnel allows the Palo Alto and Router 2 to securely communicate with each other. But the IKE Phase 1 tunnel doesn't get us to our whole goal. The whole goal is to have users, for example, on the 10.5.5 network over here, communicating with devices on the 10.1.1 network. So to actually move users traffic, they also establish a second tunnel, and I'll put it right here. It's also referred to as a Security Association, or SA for short. And this is called the IKE Phase 2 tunnel. Also, that IKE Phase 2 tunnel is often just referred to as the IPsec tunnel. And again, you and I are going to suppose that those basic concepts of how IKE version 1 with its two phases, Phase 1 and Phase 2, we're going to presume that you and I are both already familiar with those basic concepts. And if you're not, please check out that Security Plus nugget, which is video 34, and you can start at the 11-minute mark to get right to the point. So to implement the IPsec between these two sites, on the Palo Alto side, we are going to create a new tunnel interface, which is pretty simple to do. We simply go to the Network tab and go to Interfaces and create a new tunnel interface. And maybe we create tunnel interface number 4. Again, it's just a number. When we did the remote access SSL VPNs, we used a tunnel interface of .6783. So .4 is certainly available. We could use that. Once we create the new tunnel interface, we're also going to associate that with a zone. And because we already have a VPN zone that we set up earlier from our remote access VPNs, we can go ahead and associate this tunnel interface with that same VPN zone if we want to. So by having this tunnel interface associated with the VPN zone, the traffic that comes over the VPN tunnel is then going to be allowed to access other zones based on our security policy. So we can still enforce policy between, for example, the inside zone and the VPN zone simply by setting up our rules in our security policy. Now, one of the biggest parts of getting IPsec working is agreement. Having the two peers agree with what protocols they're going to use. And we need to have agreement for the IKE Phase 1 tunnel and also the IKE Phase 2 tunnel. So whatever we want the two peers to agree to for that IKE Phase 1 tunnel, we'll configure and put into an IKE profile here on the Palo Alto. That's for the IKE Phase 1. We also need to agree on the details for the IKE Phase 2. So we are going to create a second profile, which is an IPsec profile that has all those details. And these two devices, our Palo Alto firewall here and the router 2 out here, they need to know how to reach each other. They need to know what the reachable addresses are. So we are also going to configure an IKE gateway, which from the Palo Alto's perspective is going to point to the reachable IP address of the peer, R2 in this case, in order to negotiate and set up and build the IPsec tunnels. So we can kind of think of these profiles as the details that are going to go into the IPsec tunnel, and then there's a separate object that we can create under networking called IPsec tunnel. And the IPsec tunnel is going to pull in these profiles. For example, we'll specify the IPsec profile that we want to use for the IPsec tunnel. We'll call in the IKE gateway profile that we want to use for the IPsec tunnel. Another key aspect of getting this to work correctly is we are going to overlay on this IPsec connection a logical IP subnet. So not only would this VPN tunnel be used to send encrypted traffic back and forth, but we also have logical IP addressing. So we could, for example, use we have 10.11 here, 10.22 here. Our remote access VPN clients are using 10.3.3. Let's go ahead and use 10.4.4 for the logical IP subnet that's being represented by the IPsec tunnel. So maybe we give the Palo Alto the IP address of .250. That'll be consistent with our other numbering. And over here, R2, we give it the logical address of maybe .2 because it's router 2. So regarding routing, we'd also need to train the Palo Alto firewall how to reach the 10.5.5 subnet. So we could add a static route on this Palo Alto firewall that says, okay, to get to the 10.5.5 subnet, go ahead and forward it out the tunnel interface with the next hop of 10.4.4.2, which is the logical IP address for the R2 side of the IPsec tunnel. Because if the Palo Alto firewall doesn't know how to route or forward packets, it's not going to even take a second thought about encrypting that traffic. And then we're also going to have some new rules in our security policy. We're going to have rules that control the access between, for example, the VPN zone and the inside zone or the DMZ zone. That concept is very similar to what we did with the remote access SSL VPNs. And we also need to set up some security policy rules to allow the negotiation between R2 and the Palo Alto firewall itself. IPsec negotiates IKE Phase 1 tunnels using UDP port 500. And presuming that's successful, the actual IKE Phase 2 tunnel, which is using ESP, encapsulating security payload, that uses protocol 50. So ESP is not using by itself, it's not using TCP or UDP, it's its own layer 4 protocol, protocol number 50. And if we wanted to allow additional functionality, for example, NAT traversal and so forth, we could also allow ports such as UDP 4500, but now we're just getting fancy. So pretty much anything that we need to do with IPsec, we can on the Palo Alto firewall, but we need to be consciously aware that we're setting up permissions to allow that type of traffic to hit, for example, this outside interface on the Palo Alto firewall. So in this nugget, we've taken a look at the conceptual steps on the Palo Alto firewall to implement a site-to-site VPN tunnel. And in the next nuggets, we'll take a look at the implementation of these techniques to get a site-to-site tunnel up and working. So I look forward to seeing you in those nuggets. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.